In every classroom, there's always a kid who fades into the background. At Crestwood Middle School, that kid was Malik Carter. 11 years old, soft-spoken, and observant, Malik had mastered the art of being present without drawing attention. He always did his work, never acted out, and sat quietly in the last row of Miss Evelyn Prescott's homeroom class, where the walls were lined with motivational posters. But the silence often said more than the words ever did. Miss Prescott wasn't outwardly cruel. She didn't yell or throw insults. Her bias was quieter, colder, the kind you only noticed when it repeated over time. She rarely called on Malik, even when his hand was the first raised. She praised other students' efforts, but passed over his without acknowledgement. It wasn't personal, at least not openly. It was systemic, the kind of casual dismissal that kids like Malik had grown too familiar with. But what no one in that classroom realized was that Malik's silence wasn't emptiness. It was full of music, memory, and meaning. At home, in a modest apartment with creaky floorboards and faded family photos, sat an old upright piano in the living room corner. It had once belonged to Malik's grandfather, a jazz musician whose name never made it onto record labels, but whose hands told stories through keys. Malik had been playing since he was 6, taught by his mother, Danielle Carter, who had learned from her father before her. Malik didn't brag about it. He didn't need to. Music was his language, his shield, his truth. One afternoon, Malik casually mentioned to his classmate, Noah Jameson, that his grandfather had played with jazz groups in Chicago's South Side. The comment was innocent, nostalgic, but Ms. Prescott overheard, and for the first time in months, she actually looked at Malik. "Oh, then maybe you'd like to show us what you've learned," she said with a smirk. "You can give the class a little performance this Friday." It was phrased like an opportunity, but Malik knew better. He saw the way she raised her eyebrow, heard the chuckles from kids like Logan Pierce, who already imagined how embarrassing it would be when the quiet kid tried to play. It wasn't an invitation. It was a test, and one she didn't think he could pass. But Ms. Prescott had made a mistake. She thought Malik Carter was just a boy in the back. She didn't realize he was a storm behind the silence. If Malik's story already has you hooked, press 7 in the comments to show your support for what's coming next. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who believes talent doesn't need permission to shine, because the quietest voice in the room is about to speak the loudest. It started as nothing more than a quiet conversation between two boys after class. Malik Carter, sitting at his desk gathering his books, mentioned to Noah Jameson that his grandfather used to play jazz piano in clubs on the south side of Chicago. It wasn't a boast. If anything, it was a rare flicker of openness from Malik. An offhand detail about the grandfather he'd admired, but never truly known. His voice was soft, laced with reverence. He used to play real late sets. Said jazz wasn't just music. It was how he talked when words didn't work. Noah nodded, interested, and leaned in. "Do you play too?" Before Malik could answer, a third voice cut through the moment. Ms. Evelyn Prescott, standing by her desk and pretending to sort papers, had been listening more closely than she let on. "Jazz, huh?" she said, just loud enough for the rest of the class to hear. Her tone wasn't angry, but it had a sharpness to it, a faint curl of skepticism at the edges. "Well, that's quite the tradition, but jazz can be unruly, not exactly the kind of music we study here." The room fell quiet. A few students looked up. Malik felt the shift instantly. He had crossed some invisible line, said too much, offered too big a piece of himself, and now that small confession was being turned into a public display. Ms. Prescott smiled thinly and added, "You know what? Why don't you show us what your grandfather passed down? Let's have you play something for the class on Friday. We'll call it a cultural enrichment activity." A few kids chuckled. Malik looked down at his shoes. The invitation wasn't about music. It was about power. It was about turning Malik's heritage into a performance and daring him to fail. He could hear it in the silence that followed, in the amused glances exchanged between students like Logan Pierce, who never missed an opportunity to poke fun at someone different. Jazz in that moment became more than music. It became a mirror, one that reflected back a mix of admiration, discomfort, and deeply rooted bias. Malik hadn't tried to make a scene. But somehow, just speaking his truth had done that for him. And now the keys he had always played for comfort were about to become a battleground. By Tuesday morning, Malik Carter's name was everywhere, spoken in whispers, scrawled in notebooks, murmured over lunch trays. What began as a throwaway comment about jazz had morphed into the week's main event. Did you hear? Malik's gonna play piano on Friday. Bet he can't even read music. I didn't even know he could talk. The entire fifth grade at Crestwood Middle School was buzzing with expectation, but not the supportive kind. It was the kind that smells like blood in the water, curiosity edged with cruelty. For kids like Logan Pierce, it was a new form of entertainment. Oh man, he laughed at recess. This is gonna be epic. She's setting him up. Malik's gonna freeze like a statue. Even students who didn't mean harm fed the momentum. I hope he's good, one said genuinely. Otherwise, that's gonna be rough. Noah Jameson, the classmate who had innocently sparked the conversation, tried to downplay the situation. He probably won't even go through with it, he muttered, guilt creeping into his voice. But deep down, even Noah was curious. He had never heard Malik say more than a few sentences at a time, let alone perform in front of a crowd. Then there was Chloe Bennett, the quiet girl who sat 2 rows over from Malik. She wasn't part of the gossip, but she watched everything. She saw the way Malik had gone even more silent, shoulders tighter, eyes always scanning the floor. She noticed how Ms. Prescott smiled more that week, but only when talking about Friday's performance. It wasn't a teacher preparing for a lesson. It was a predator circling an outcome. Malik felt the pressure building like steam in a closed room. Every hallway felt tighter. Every glance felt like a weight. He didn't want attention. He didn't want to prove anything. But now it seemed like the entire school was holding its breath, waiting for him to crack, to stumble, to be the awkward, stuttering kid in front of the piano. At home, he didn't talk much. His mother, Danielle Carter, knew something was wrong, but Malik brushed off her concern. Just tired, he said. But when she walked past his room that night, she heard the soft, slow melody of jazz drifting through the door. It wasn't practice, it was prayer. His fingers moved across the keys like they were asking the music to speak for him, because words had never worked the way notes could. The pressure didn't stop at school. It followed him in his sleep. It clung to him when he looked in the mirror. But so did something else, a memory of his grandfather, sitting at that same piano years ago, saying, "You don't play for them. You play for what's inside you." And that was the thought Malik carried with him as the week crept toward Friday. Not that he had to impress them, but that he had to remember who he was before they tried to tell him otherwise. The night before the performance, the apartment was unusually quiet. Even the neighbors upstairs, who usually stomped through the evening, seemed to sense something different in the air. Malik Carter sat at the upright piano in the living room, his fingers hovering just above the keys but not pressing them. The room was dim, lit only by the soft orange hue of a floor lamp, casting long shadows across the chipped wood of the piano's frame. He wasn't practicing now. He was listening, searching, not for notes but for courage. He had played this piano hundreds of times. It was old, temperamental, and one of the only things in the apartment that had belonged to his grandfather. Most of the time, it had blended into the background, but tonight it felt sacred, like a place of memory and something more. His mother, Danielle Carter, peeked around the corner with a warm but cautious expression. She had seen the pressure building all week, the way Malik had gone quieter than usual, the way his fingers had trembled ever so slightly even when he played flawlessly. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked over and placed a worn envelope on the top of the piano. Malik glanced at it, confused. "What's this?" Danielle sat beside him. "Something your grandfather left for you. I was waiting for the right time. I think it's now." Malik opened the envelope carefully, revealing a single sheet of yellowed manuscript paper, the lines hand-drawn in fading ink. At the top, scrawled in his grandfather's distinct handwriting, were the words, "For Malik, when words fail, let the notes speak." Below it was a melody, one Malik had never seen, never heard. It wasn't a finished composition. It was something more personal, a message written in the only language his grandfather trusted, to be fully honest. Music. Malik stared at the notes, tracing the rhythm with his eyes, then his fingertips. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice behind him, urging him not to perform, to express. "You were never meant to play to prove anything," Danielle said softly. "He always said you had a sound inside you that was bigger than rooms, bigger than judgment." Malik looked up at her, unsure whether to smile or cry. Instead, he turned to the piano, placed his hands on the keys and began to play. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was his, and tomorrow it would be heard. Friday morning arrived like a weight on Malik Carter's chest. As students filed into room 203, the energy was different, electric, buzzing with a mix of anticipation, curiosity, and cruel amusement. Malik could feel the eyes on him before he even sat down. He kept his backpack close, his face neutral. But inside, the memory of his grandfather's handwritten music burned like a quiet flame. Miss Evelyn Prescott stood at the front of the room, smiling with the same tight-lipped expression she always wore when pretending her actions were for educational enrichment. "As promised," she announced, "Malik will be treating us to a short piano performance today. Let's give him a warm welcome." The clap that followed was shallow and scattered. Malik stood, walked to the upright piano near the corner of the classroom, and sat down. The keys were slightly out of tune. The bench wobbled. It wasn't ideal, but it was enough. He placed the sheet music from his grandfather gently on the stand and took a breath. The first note was soft, so soft, some students leaned in to hear. Then came another, then a cascade, building into a bluesy rhythm full of tension, soul, and depth. Malik's fingers moved with purpose, dancing between octaves, bending time with pauses and accelerations that felt unplanned but perfect. The room, once restless, fell still. No whispers, no laughter. Even Logan Pierce, who had been poised for a joke, sat frozen, mouth slightly open. The melody shifted into something slower, more emotional. Malik played not to impress but to speak. Every note carried years of pride, hurt, strength, and grace. He wasn't just honoring his grandfather. He was reclaiming a space that had tried to keep him small. By the time he played the final chord, the room was utterly silent. Then came the first clap, and another. Then the entire class stood, not because they were told to, but because something in them demanded it. Even Ms. Prescott, stunned into stillness, gave a single hesitant nod. Malik stood slowly, not smiling, not gloating, just calm. He didn't need applause. He had said what he came to say. If Malik's music moved you, press 7 in the comments and show him you heard every note. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes talent speaks louder than prejudice. This isn't the end. There's more to come. And trust us, you won't want to miss what happens next. When the final note from Malik Carter's performance dissolved into stillness, the room didn't immediately erupt into applause. It simply paused. A long, breath-held kind of silence. The kind that only happens when something important has just happened and no one quite knows how to respond. Eventually, the clapping came, scattered at first, then growing stronger. But even as the hands met, the expressions across the classroom told the deeper story. Ms. Evelyn Prescott stood motionless behind her desk, her usual air of cool control replaced by something tighter, unsettled. For once, she didn't have a script. She didn't congratulate Malik. She didn't move to resume the lesson. She just looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time all year. The students didn't rush to speak either. Logan Pierce, who'd spent all week whispering jokes about Malik flopping, now avoided his gaze entirely. Noah Jameson, who'd first learned about Malik's musical roots, sat with his hands folded in his lap, unsure whether to feel pride or guilt. And Chloe Bennett, who had watched it all unfold from the sidelines, kept her eyes on Malik as if trying to memorize every part of what she'd just witnessed. It wasn't just that Malik had played well. It was that he had defied every expectation without saying a single word. In that moment, the classroom's rules shifted. The unspoken hierarchies of who was heard, who was overlooked, who belonged where. They all cracked, quietly but irreversibly. As the bell rang and the students began to file out, Malik stayed behind a moment, gently folding the yellowed sheet of music his grandfather had written. He moved with calm, without urgency, like someone who had just released a weight he'd been carrying too long. No one spoke to Ms. Prescott as they left, and she didn't stop them. That afternoon, Malik wasn't surrounded by a cheering crowd. There were no fireworks, no spotlight. But what lingered was something deeper, a silence that carried weight, a silence that came not from awkwardness, but from realization. Because what they had seen, what they had heard, couldn't be dismissed. It would echo in their minds long after the final bell. And in that silence, Malik Carter had already said everything that needed to be said. The week after Malik Carter's unforgettable piano performance, the buzz around Crestwood Middle School hadn't died down. It had only grown quieter and deeper. Students no longer spoke about Malik in passing. His name was uttered with a kind of reverence, as if they were still processing what they had seen, what they had heard. But what none of them expected was that the final word on Malik's story wouldn't come from a teacher or a classmate, but from a man who carried his past in his voice. On Friday morning, the school intercom crackled to life. "Attention, all fifth grade students, please report to the auditorium for a special guest presentation." Teachers exchanged glances. There had been no email, no flyer. Even Ms. Evelyn Prescott, who sat tensely in the back of the room, looked caught off guard. The students filed into the auditorium, whispering with curiosity. On stage stood a tall, sharply dressed man in his late 60s, wearing a caramel-colored suit, polished shoes, and a well-worn fedora tilted slightly to the side. His name, as Principal Daniels introduced, was Mr. Raymond Ellis, a noted jazz historian and former music producer who now spent his days documenting the lives of under-recognized musicians who had shaped America's soundscape. Mr. Ellis didn't begin with a long speech. Instead, he quietly clicked a remote and brought up a slideshow of black and white photographs, grainy images of jazz clubs, trumpets caught mid-blare, pianos under dim lights, smoke curling through the air like music itself. Then an image appeared that made Malik's breath catch. There on the screen was a younger version of his grandfather, Miles Carter, head bowed at a piano, caught mid-note in a photo that shimmered with memory. "This man," Mr. Ellis said, his voice full of respect, "was one of the most talented pianists I ever heard. He didn't chase the spotlight. He played for the music, for the people, for something deeper than applause." He paused, letting the photo linger. "Most people in this room won't recognize him, but someone here already carries his sound forward." Then he turned to the audience. "Malik Carter, would you stand up?" A wave of surprise rolled through the auditorium. All heads turned as Malik, stunned, slowly rose from his seat. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. Mr. Ellis smiled warmly. "Last week I heard you play, and I recognized that tone, that phrasing, that soul. I recognized your grandfather. What you gave us wasn't a performance. It was a continuation of a story, and stories like that deserve to be honored." The room was silent. No one laughed. No one smirked. For the first time, Malik wasn't standing out. He was standing within a legacy. He wasn't a boy who surprised everyone with a talent they never expected. He was the next verse in a song that had always deserved to be heard. After the assembly with Mr. Raymond Ellis, the school halls carried a different kind of silence, one that buzzed not with anticipation, but reflection. Students who had once looked through Malik Carter now looked toward him. They didn't rush to speak or bombard him with praise. Instead, they offered nods, quiet acknowledgments, and something even more valuable, respect. But while the students had begun to change, the air between Malik and Miss Evelyn Prescott remained heavy, unfinished. There had been no apology, no conversation, just glances exchanged in the classroom. Glances that lingered too long. Glances that avoided what both of them knew had to come. It wasn't until Monday afternoon, when the final bell rang and room 203 emptied, that the moment arrived. Malik was gathering his things when he heard her voice, softer than usual. "Malik, could I have a word?" He turned slowly. Ms. Prescott stood near her desk, hands clasped tightly, the mask of composure still on her face, but faltering around the edges. He nodded and approached, his steps quiet but unhurried. He didn't sit. She cleared her throat. "I wanted to talk about Friday and last week." Malik said nothing. "I think it's clear I misjudged you," she continued, "and your abilities. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I thought, well, I didn't think. Not enough. Malik studied her. The classroom suddenly felt colder, the walls closer. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't going to make it easy for her either. He had carried too much for too long to let it dissolve with vague words. You didn't misjudge my ability, he said finally. You judged me. Period. Ms. Prescott's shoulders stiffened. The honesty hit harder than any outburst could have. You heard jazz and saw a stereotype, Malik continued. You didn't expect me to know what I was talking about. You didn't ask questions. You just waited for me to fail. Her lips parted to speak, but he raised a hand, gentle but firm. I'm not asking for an apology, he added, but I hope the next time a kid tells you something about who they are, you believe them before you try to test them. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then Ms. Prescott, with a quiet breath, sat down behind her desk, not in defeat, but in reckoning. She looked at Malik, not through him, not past him, but at him. You're right, she said softly, and I hear you. That was all. No dramatic reversal, no grand gesture. But something had shifted. The silence between them was no longer one of dismissal. It was one of acknowledgement. That week, Ms. Prescott began teaching differently. She called on students she used to ignore. She paused before reacting. She asked more questions. She even brought in a vinyl record of Thelonious Monk and let it play softly while students worked. No explanation, just music. Malik noticed. He didn't need validation, but he did appreciate change. Because sometimes facing someone isn't about revenge. It's about calculation, measuring what matters, weighing truth against silence, and choosing to speak anyway. And when you do that, even a teacher has no choice but to listen. By the end of the school year, Malik Carter was no longer just the quiet kid in the back. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't trying to be. But there was something in the way people made room for him now. In the lunchroom, in the hallways, in conversations. He hadn't forced anyone to listen. He'd simply played his truth loud enough that they couldn't ignore it. The piano in room 203, once a dusty afterthought, now stood as a symbol. A few times a week, students asked if Malik would play something during free period. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he just smiled and let the silence say enough. When he played, it wasn't for show. It was a form of honesty, a reminder that not all truth needs to be shouted to be heard. Even Ms. Evelyn Prescott, who had once used her authority to diminish him, now nodded with something resembling respect whenever she passed him. Their relationship never became warm, but it became real. She called on him when he raised his hand. She listened when he spoke, and in small ways she taught differently, not with fanfare but with intention. Malik's performance was no longer talked about every day, but its echo lingered. More than music, what stayed with people was the shift it caused. Students like Chloe Bennett started speaking up more in class. Even Logan Pierce, still brash and loud, toned down his taunts and offered Malik a fist bump one afternoon without a word. But Malik never changed to meet their expectations. He remained the same thoughtful boy who had once been content with being unseen. Only now he chose when and how to be heard. He hadn't won a trophy. He hadn't received a medal. But he had done something far more powerful. He had walked into a room that tried to shrink him and left it larger, with more light, more sound, more truth. And so when Malik sat down at the piano that final week of school and played a few notes, the class fell quiet. Not out of surprise, but out of understanding. The boy who played the truth-telling game didn't just enter the room, he redefined it. Malik Carter's journey offers profound lessons that resonate deeply, especially with those who have navigated the complexities of life over many decades. His story underscores the enduring importance of self-expression, the courage to confront prejudice, and the unifying power of music across generations. Embracing authentic self-expression, Malik's experience highlights the significance of expressing one's true self. Authentic self-expression is not merely about showcasing talents. It's about conveying one's identity and values without reservation. For many, particularly in later stages of life, there may have been instances where societal expectations or personal apprehensions led to suppressed feelings or unvoiced opinions. Malik's narrative serves as a reminder that embracing and articulating our genuine selves can lead to personal fulfillment and inspire others to do the same. Confronting and overcoming prejudice. Malik's interactions with Miss Evelyn Prescott reflect the subtle yet pervasive nature of prejudice. He teaches us that confronting bias doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it's the quiet determination to prove stereotypes wrong that initiates change. Many in the older generation have witnessed or personally faced various forms of discrimination. Malik's story reinforces the notion that challenging misconceptions through personal integrity and excellence can shift perspectives and foster a more inclusive environment. Music as a bridge across generations. The connection between Malik and his grandfather through music illustrates how art forms can transcend age, serving as a conduit for shared experiences and mutual understanding. For many elders, music has been a companion through various life phases, evoking memories and emotions. Engaging with younger generations through music can create common ground, bridging generational gaps and fostering meaningful relationships. Applying these lessons today. In our current societal landscape, where divisions often seem pronounced, Malik's journey offers actionable insights. 1. Encourage open dialogue. Create spaces where individuals feel safe to express their true selves, leading to deeper connections and mutual respect. 2. Challenge personal biases. Reflect on and address our own prejudices, understanding that change often begins with self-awareness. 3. Utilize art and music. Engage in or support artistic endeavors that promote unity and understanding, recognizing their power to connect diverse groups. 4th, mentorship and legacy. Share experiences and wisdom with younger generations, using personal stories to impart valuable life lessons and preserve cultural narratives. Malik's story is a testament to the enduring human spirit's capacity to inspire change, bridge divides, and celebrate authenticity. As we navigate our own paths, let us remember the importance of staying true to ourselves, confronting biases with grace, and embracing the arts as a means of connection and understanding. If Malik's journey resonates with you, press 7 in the comments to share your thoughts and experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share this video with friends and family to continue exploring stories that inspire and unite us. Stay tuned for more narratives that delve into the depths of human experience and the lessons they offer.